Welcome to IP Tech Tuesday number 60. And today we're going to talk about positioning and flexibility and the relationship to IP. Before we start, we still have 50 hostages and we're waiting for them to come home. So we'll take a minute to remember them. Flexibility. So we know that IP is about the future, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And that's especially true in startup companies that don't even know what they're going to be doing in the future, which means that you have to be flexible, the company. And how flexible? Potentially, the IP should be as flexible as a company, competitors, technology, market, all of them combined. On the other hand, we know that people like planning, making an IP plan. Here's what we're going to file and when we're going to file it. And planning appears to be the exact opposite of being flexible. Why? If you have a plan and you stick to it, that's it. You're not flexible. Why is this an issue? Because even though you can plan for multiple alternatives and for various risk scenarios, there's something called uncertainty which gets in the way. And let me give you two examples. First example, companies that were doing very sophisticated things just 4 years ago, nobody needs them anymore because generative AI simply does it, whether it be image analysis or text analysis. Okay, it simply makes all of these things obsolete. Any companies that was doing one of these activities did not expect it to happen. And the other type of uncertainty is when big tech, and we know which companies we're talking about, they like your product so much that they simply offer it, and then there's nothing left for you to do. So there's a lot of uncertainties happening, and you have to be flexible in order to deal with them. Now, if you're familiar with the concept of anti-fragility, desirably, you're not only flexible enough to be robust, meaning that we can hit you when you're still standing, but that you're actually anti-fragile, that you get better when these things happen to you. That is not going to be the subject of today's talk, but to be clear, what kind of flexibility we want. Well, what is the solution? Perhaps you plan to be flexible. There are other solutions as well, but what does that mean, planning to be flexible? It means that if you optimize, then what you build is a fragile system. It means that you want to create affordances, things that can be used for multiple applications. It means you need to create fallbacks. It means that you need to create what I call resource cheap subpositions. Okay, it's very common. Startup runs out of money. You have to cut your IP budget by 50% to 80%. Do you have any useful IP position left after you do that? You need to assume all sorts of failures, and one way to do that is do scenario analysis. You need to plan to safe fail rather than fail safe. Fail safe means it's going to work. Safe fail means that if it doesn't work, we'll survive. And one of the examples I saw on this link is that the airplane doesn't fall from the sky is fail safe. But when they discover on the ground that there's a problem with the airplane and give you a different one instead, that's safe fail. It's a failure. The airplane isn't good, but it's safe because it happened on the ground. And the system is not affected because it's designed to move airplanes from one spot to another if they're needed. And I mentioned the word position, and I'm going to mention it again. Strategy is about setting up your company in a position to win. And most of the talk today is about what does it mean, position, and how do we look at it? Any case, when we plan for flexibility, the plan has to be both an IP, the IP has to be flexible, but also various activities that are either helped by IP or help IP also need flexibility. And two great examples are R&D, which generate IP, and marketing, which uses IP, but of course it also generates IP. I believe, and not everybody agrees with me, that strategy can be more rigid than plan. Why? Because your plan and the actions that you're doing need to change or might need to change whenever something happens. But your overall strategy can be the same, okay? Anybody who's used a transportation app knows what I'm talking about. You want to get from point A to point B. Your strategy is to go by public transportation. A bus gets canceled, there's a traffic jam, the computer immediately suggests different public transportation, which will provide that same result. As I mentioned, the big problem is uncertainty. And uncertainty involves things that you don't know. A lot of different ways of taxonomy of uncertainty. I wanted to talk about these four, which I think are the interesting ones for positioning. The first one I called the adjacent unknown. Adjacent unknown means I know it's not going to be exactly the same, but it's going to be pretty similar. So we just have to put a little slack in the system and it's going to be okay. Stable unknown means all sorts of unknown things might happen, and the company has, or the IP portfolio, need to be able to live through it. Far out unknown is what people call black swans. And the one I think is most interesting is a better unknown. Better unknown means that something unexpected happens, and we want to be able to take advantage of it in order to get a better and probably different future than what we plan to have. And one of the related questions, and I gave here a link to an article about regular strategy, but it's exactly the same, I think, in IP strategy, is strategy about solving a problem or not? And better unknown is not. Stable unknown might be, but better unknown means I don't know where I'm going. So what we want to have is an IP position, here's that word again, which allows us to take advantage of and harness whatever happens. And interestingly, I talked about flexibility, but it means you have to be the most flexible exactly where you know the least. Okay? Now, I'm just warning you that usually when there's stuff that you don't know and stuff that you do know, there's a lot of pressure to write IP to deal with what you do know. But we, of course, want to be able to cover especially what we don't know. So I mentioned this IP position a few times. And you always have an IP position, and it doesn't matter how you obtained it, whether flexibly with a plan or not. But what an IP position is, in contrast to an IP portfolio, is that the IP position puts your IP in the context of what it is that you're trying to do and where it is that your venture company is situated. While the IP portfolio is just a list of all the IP that you happen to have. Giving you another term, there's a controlling IP position, and a controlling IP position means that you're able to either block a competitor or to, let's call it, encourage a desired relationship. And for example, if any alternative a competitor will want is covered by your IP, then you have control. A weak IP position is a kind of IP situation where people can ignore what you're doing. So now the question becomes, how do we decide what to do? And the first step is to talk about what are the parts of the IP position. Now, obviously, an IP position is an IP portfolio arranged in a certain way, so it includes patents and so on. But if we look at it from a functional perspective, I'm giving a list of different items that are part of the IP position. First of all, patents that cover your own technology, trade secrets, freedom to operate, IP which is designed to use against your competitors or for transactions or for negotiation. You know, if you're infringing them and they're infringing you, it's okay. And last but not least, IP, which is for non-goal positioning. I'll talk about that a bit more later. The fact that you're able to do R&D or license IP is also part of your IP position. And the point is that the IP that you need for your position, you can buy it or create it. Different parts of your position will act differently. Some of them will give you power, which is basically making other people do what you want. Some will give you exclusion, which means preventing people from doing that and giving you maybe a mini monopoly. And some IP is being used as a statement where for various marketing or psychological regions or supporting branding, you have that IP. Now, each type of functional part of an IP position has its own timeline. And one of your jobs, and in this sense, the IP position reflects the IP strategy, is to figure out which function do you need where. So while we're talking about all of this position, not only because it's a way of visualizing, but also because flexibility in an IP plan can come from having a good position. A good position means that when you need something, you have IP in that place. One of the types of IPs that I mentioned is for non-goal position. Okay, usually we talk about aligning the IP with the business plan. Okay, so look at this progression. I have a goal and I plan IP which will support the goal. Or I can do something more sophisticated, more flexible. I have strategy which will support the goal or potential goals. Sometimes it's not exactly goals, it's directions. But sometimes I have strategy that is not tied to any specific goals that I want to achieve. And sometimes you have to design an IP position where there is no predefined goal, or you have a lot of uncertainty about what your goal is going to be. Now, the word goal, you know, can mean whatever you want, but usually if you can imagine a meeting with the CEO and they ask you, what is this IP for? You have to be able to tie it to one of the company goals. And if you can't, it's non-goal IP. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to enter a field where you don't know what your product is, you don't know what the market is, and or you don't know what the technological solution is. You probably don't have any clear goals. And I'll give you a real example. You might not know, but a lot of issues having to do with gaining weight are under control of the nervous system. That's really exciting. We know obesity is a big problem. So, and we know that nerves can be controlled, you know, using electricity. But more than that, at this stage, we don't know. We don't know who we're selling it to. We don't know what the product looks like. We don't know implanted, not implanted, used every day, once a year. We don't know anything. We can start planning and executing an IP position. Okay, so we don't have any specific goal. We can start building an IP position, or at least planning it. In order to visualize this talk about position, I'm inspired by this article, and you can see the picture on the side, and he talks about different things that have to do with history. But we're going to talk about IP. And I'm going to talk mainly about the adjacent unknown. And the underlying concept, and this is important, is that a venture, yours or anybody else's, has some sort of working point. In other words, what technology is it using? What business plan is it using? And where is it in the value chain? Okay? Are they digging out iron ore? Are they smelting iron? Are they shaping iron into I-beams? Are they building bridges out of I-beams? Are they a holding company which builds toll bridges? All of those are different locations on the value chain, which starts with making the iron and ends with making the money. A very focused portfolio. Let me explain what you're looking at. The y-axis is the value chain or visibility of what's happening. And like I said, mining would be on the bottom and collecting toll on a bridge would be on top. The center line divides between the market and technology. And as you go to the right, you see more alternative technology. And as you go to the left, you see more alternative business. So in the simplest example, this little smiley face is what your company is doing. And the red circle is your IP position. So the IP position is covering what the company is doing with respect to where it is in the value chain. And it covers a specific technology and market it's using. And it covers a little bit more in each direction because, like I said before, you need adjacent. This is a classic IP portfolio. The company is doing the smiley, and we have a portfolio which covers what the company is doing. The sand face is what would happen if the company changed what it was doing. Then this IP portfolio doesn't cover anything of what you're doing. Now, obviously, I'm simplifying it and it's abstract. It doesn't have to be circles. Here's an example of what people would consider to be an unfocused portfolio. So the company stood over here and it does have a circle, but it's in a lighter red, which means you have less good coverage. It's easier to design around, weaker IP, fewer patents, whatever it might be. And we also have these blobs everywhere across the map. We have something covering lower down the value chain, something covering a different market, something covering a technology we're not doing. Usually when you see a portfolio like this, you would say that they didn't know what they were doing or they just filed patents, as they were invented. But now imagine that you have, I called it a plan. What if you know what you're doing? So this one is specifically to block your competitor. This one is for licensing to one of your suppliers. This one is in case you don't manage to do what's in red, maybe you're going to do what's in yellow. So now we have an IP position which takes into account, if you notice, a competition, your suppliers, future alternatives. Make it a little bit more sophisticated. Each one component of the IP position has some sort of lifetime. When is it relevant? When will it be alive? So for example, the licensing goes down, let's pretend linearly with time. technology and what you're doing doesn't have much value now, but the IP will have more value later, and then it's going to go down. The ability to block the competitor also goes down with time, and you have more flexibility at the beginning because it's still patent application, so you can change the claims to grab the competitor. And I also showed these dotted lines, and these dashed lines and dotted lines talk about the flexibilities that you have in changing your IP position. So for example, here, we have the ability to move all the way up like this. And in the licensing, we have the ability to extend our IP into other technologies. Remember, technologies is to the right. Usually you want to have what I would call vertical integration. The company might be here, but you want to cover both upstream and downstream parts of the value chain, because those parts of the value chain are either parts you will naturally want to expand into, or where your suppliers or distributors might be, and they're going to, partners, and they're going to want to take the money and leave you without anything. Here I'm showing you the coverage of a competitor, and you notice in what we're doing, we're covering a wide range of technologies, including some of the technologies that are covered by the competitor. The shape doesn't have to be circular. And I'm just giving an example of a trapezoid. Maybe we need better IP upstream in the value chain. I'm also showing you where we have freedom to operate. Each one of these purple rectangles is a place where we have freedom to operate. There's also, luckily, overlap between the freedom to operate and what we are actually doing. And I'm showing here that usually when you have freedom to operate, it's going to be narrower than your protective position for that area. And why? It's easier to get a positive FTO opinion if you're not trying to cover everything. And usually you want to be able to have at least one clear way forward. So this is the way it usually is, but not always. We can talk about the positions of others. Each one of these colors is a different competitor. And you can see how the competitors' positions overlap what we're doing. And I said competitors, but it could also be partners or potential competitors, partners, and so on. And if you notice, gold seems to have the most interesting position because they interfere both with blue and with us. And you also see that if we want to go up chain, silver has an IP position which might be blocking us. What does it look like when you have a non-goal position intentionally? Okay, so this position is planned, not based only on what we're doing now. It's based, for example, on technologies that relate to the main challenges. Okay, that's over here. We're also covering multiple value chain positions. Okay, because we expect our competitors to focus on one of them, and we don't know which one, we don't know which competitors, but we do know it's valuable or potentially valuable. I just want you to notice, because we have so many different IPs thrown around, we're probably going to have a weaker position in the non-goal IP than we have in the goal IP. The world doesn't change, doesn't stay the same, it changes. So these lines indicate where it's profitable to be now and in the future. So now this appears to be profitable. In the future, it might be this, and in the higher future, it might be this market with this technology. I'm just reminding you that I'm arranging the technologies and the markets not according to what they are in general, but what they are relative to what our company is doing. So right here is exactly the technology we're doing. This is a little bit different. This is more different, more different, more different, really different. Same thing. Here's my marketing business plan. Here it's different, more different, more different, and more different. So you have a shape like this, which means that we're going to move one way in the technology and we're going to move another way in the market or business plan. So what are we going to do if the world looks like that? One of the things we can do that our IP position can do is it can help shape the landscape, and in particular, the choice architecture, how other people should be making decisions. And we're helping the competitor make the right decision. How do we do it? We can file over here. You notice a minefield. New competitors that want to come in might prefer not to go in this area because there's a minefield. They might go somewhere else. We have a competitor over here, but since we have this position and this position, it's difficult for them to directly compete with us. On the other hand, we have blue. Blue is IP and technology, which we are licensing for low cost. It means the competitor could or would be attracted to move to here. As the market changes, I'm not blocking all the possibilities, he can move to here. If we make an assumption that the competitor can only make small steps, the competitor can't suddenly jump to here. They have to either go all the way around, or the way around here, or go through our IP. And it's much easier to go here where you have a free, cheap license and so on. I was showing you that the world is uniform, but of course it's not. For example, at this part of the value chain, there might be a relatively small number of market options and a relatively large number of technological solutions, while over here it's the other way around. There's many more marketing options, but many fewer technological solutions. So it gives us a little bit of context to understand which position is better, the red one or the green one. Okay, so the red one really constrains what the competition can do about technology. The green one really constrains what they can do about market. Obviously, we want both. Last but not least, I didn't generate any GIFs, but you do it in time. So step one, I'm here. I have some IP around what I'm doing, and I have a freedom to operate. Time passes, the company is probably going to move to here. I might even plan on doing it. This IP, you notice it shrunk a bit, but it became red because I got it. And now I have a new one. And I also filed some IP where I have freedom to operate because maybe that's what I'm going to want to do. And then here, as I have more time and money, so I might be staying here, but I start building an IP position, which will help me for whatever it might be. So I talked about these parts of the position and where are they? So a simple answer is to say that each part can be one or more IP items. So this would be a patent, this would be a patent, this would be a trade secret. But also you can have a single IP item, like a patent or patent application, which is on several different parts of the map. So it saves money, but it has two problems. One, it's usually not so focused. And two, when people look at your IP portfolio and try to decide what to do, they look at the patent as a unit and not as actually two separate functions, which happen to be in the same document. I talk about position, but there's also the issue of momentum. I'm starting to file more and more in this direction. The company's going in this direction. And we talked about non-goal IP. So there's two types of non-goal IP. The first one is, I don't have a goal. I just, in case people want to come into this field, I want IP which will block them. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what the business plan is. What IP is generally more suitable for blocking them? And in the other type, it's not that I don't have any goal at all, but I know the direction. I know we're going to go in the direction of disposable, but I don't know what part is going to be disposable. Okay? So I don't have a goal, but since I know that we're going in the direction of disposable, we're going in the direction of integrating AI, going into the direction of reducing weight, we can start talking about what IP is relevant when you go in that general direction. And one of the ways that we can be flexible with an IP position is position on demand. Position on demand means that my company has a capability of generating part of the IP position when I need. And on the one hand, it costs money and takes time. And on the other hand, if you don't do it, maybe you won't be able to later. And the classic example is a trade secret. If I have a trade secret, depending on all sorts of factors, I maintain the opportunity to generate patents at a later time. And patents, as you know, usually work better against competition than trade secrets. Not always, usually. But if I wait too long, somebody else might discover the secret, or the secret might slip out, and I call that decay. So when you talk about position on demand, you have to ask yourself, will I actually be able to do it? And another example is know-how. So know-how often turns into patents. And again, I can do it later. What happens if I wait? But meanwhile, my know-how is position on demand. And there's also IP on demand. I actually filed a patent, but I'm not asserting it against anybody. So within certain reasonable limitations, it's not affecting the world, but if I need it, I can suddenly pull out that patent and start threatening people. Again, there's a problem of decay. If you don't use IP, you either lose rights or it becomes less relevant. And R&D on demand and marketing on demand and other resources that you need in order to either generate IP or take advantage of it. Okay, this is very beautiful drawings that I gave you, if I made them myself. But the question is, can we be a little bit more quantitative? I have a position. What can I say about my IP position that is quantitative? Well, one thing people do is they look at the diversity in the patent classifications. And if all of your IP is in one classification, you're obviously less diverse than if you are in 20 different classifications. There's a problem with this way of looking at it because it's very technologically oriented. And if you notice the position, out of 3 dimensions, only one of them is actually technological. And you can apply it to trade secrets, but only technological trade secrets by assigning them an IPC and looking how they, whatever. So I think it's interesting to look at the diversity, but not only by IPC, on different parts of the customer journey and the product. What I'm offering instead, though, is to build a correlation matrix, which you're going to see on the next page. And a correlation matrix looks at 2 IP items. And if they relate to the same subject matter, they have a high correlation. And if they don't, they have a lower correlation. So if I have a patent on making a detergent and I have another patent on the same detergent with a particular additive, it could even be a continuation. These are highly correlated. On the other hand, if I have a trade secret on how you make the detergent, that is often less correlated with the patent on the detergent. And the same thing applies to trademarks and trade secrets. So here's what it looks like. I took 8 IP items, no, 10. There's secrets, data, patents, freedom to operate, trademarks, more than one patent. And I built a correlation matrix, and you notice we have a cluster here, kind of. And other than that, the correlation is relatively low. So what this is telling us is that in this field, we have a relatively expansive IP position, and all of these other items are separate, not contiguous, and in other places, either technologically or in the value chain. Is this good or bad? I don't know. But now that we have a cluster, we can ask a question. Is this cluster built assuming, for example, that you cannot run generative AI on your cell phone? Is there that assumption underlying these 4 things? Well, if you have that assumption, you now know that that's a weak assumption. At the very least, it's not stable over time. Or maybe all of these assume that knives have to be made out of metal. Well, people can make a knife not out of metal, and they simply avoid this entire cluster. Now, what I like about this way of showing you the shape of your position is that the clusters are based on subjects and words. I can write a description of what this patent's about and what this patent's about, and ask our good friend, generative AI, to tell me how correlated, how similar are these 2 patents, 2 ideas, 2 secrets, and so on. We can even do better. We can also talk about how important each assumption is. And then we can build a correlation which not only shows me the size of the correlation, but also how important it is. And again, what we get to see is the centers of gravity of the position. And just a second. I get to see something like this, except it's not laid out. So you can take this data, look at it here in order to get a feeling for the shape, and look at it here in order to get feeling for the strength. And we can also link, if we have a strong position over here, okay, we can link this to what are the main challenges and issues that the IP portfolio has to deal with. So I talked about non-goal IP position. And so how do we plan it? How do we make it? And I'm only going to talk about it a little bit, unfortunately. But first, I'd like to contrast it with IP design. In IP design, you assume a particular product or customer journey, and then you make sure that it's, covered with your IP. In non-goal design, you don't assume a particular product or customer journey. Instead, you want to identify things that possibly have an impact in the future. Challenges, needs, what competitors seem to want to like, space analysis, white space, if people are not doing it. Problem space, wherever there's a problem, something interesting could be there. Solution space, things that are easier to do or more likely to happen. Technological space analysis, are there choke points? What is close to what people might be doing? what kind of disruptive technologies might come up, where you can make money, where you expect ripples. So generally, what you're trying to identify is what might be critical pathways, even if you don't know where the pathway is leading to or what it's part of. And one of the ways that you can help to do that is by doing scenario analysis, where you assume different possible futures and you see how you get there and so on. And especially you want to make scenarios about what the world is going to look like after one of these disruptive technologies or after you yourself disrupt the world. Why? What's the thought going into choosing these different items? Well, first of all, you want to reduce the fragility of your IP position by having more diversity. And if you have coverage of more orthogonal things, where orthogonal means less correlated, even if one of them dies, the other one continues. So let me give you an example. If we have IP on the technology and on what's customer facing and on what's ecosystem facing and on what gives us money, then even if one of these disappears, the technology you thought you were going to use, you're not going to use anymore, or it's not going to be your customers, the other ones are relatively unrelated and you still have a good IP position. Or here's another way set of orthogonal things: the invention, the product, your business model, and business needs. Okay, again, there's a business need, you can answer it with a business model or with a different business model. So if one falls through, you still have protection through the business needs. When you choose one of these position places, I called it a sink, to cover, you can ask yourself, how stable is it when disruption happens or more general change? We can also ask, how common is that thing to multiple scenarios after disruption? Okay, so we know that people are moving into the city. We don't know what it's going to look like, but is there one common feature to all of the different ways that people can move into the city? And the answer is probably higher density of people and therefore higher density of transportation needs. And then, of course, you choose the relevant ones and you consider your money and reliability and all sorts of other things. And you need a lot of context for it. And I'm only giving you, 2 slides on it. It's a whole subject on its own. Now, I've been talking about positioning of the IP, but there's also the position of the company. I believe that the IP position should be larger than position of other parts of the company. Why? Because IP is generally cheaper to create than, multiple marketing positions. And you should also think about the IP positions of your competitors. So I showed you one chart that showed it. And you can ask, if I look at their positions and I'm assuming that they're not idiots, can I figure out what their business position is? You can call that business intelligence. Flip side, plan your IP position in a way that interacts in a beneficial way with the IP positions and with the company positions of others. Now, this all is part of this more general idea of strategic flexibility. It's about how you can change what you're doing and where you want to go and all sorts of things. I have here some quotes, but the important thing is that IP strategy can be much more responsive than business strategy. Why? You have less momentum and less money involved, and fewer people are going to say, oh, but yeah, I'm doing it for 4 years. We can't stop now. I'm building a factory. I'm training workers. We can't stop. With IP, you're much more flexible. So how do we do it? How do we make a flexible IP position? First, you have to continuously look at your position and see if you need to change it. And you need to build a company and a strategy that can actually react to what's happening. So, step one, most important step, define and budget what kind of balance you believe is correct for your company between goal and non-goal oriented IP. Second, you need to have some sort of mechanism that senses that something is changing in the world. Otherwise, there's no meaning to being flexible. Then you have to have some sort of mechanism, and mechanism, we're talking about people, AI in the company, or advisors, and so on, to make sense of what is happening. And last, you have to have some sort of policy and resources which allow you to react, in particular, to take advantage and to see things. And at the same time, you don't want to scare or cause damage to other parts of the company. So it's a general roadmap of what you need, but it's not really specific enough for you to do. I wanted to talk for a minute about what it means for an IP position to be flexible. Well, first of all, what's more important is that the IP strategy supports flexible actions by the company. But once we get past that, flexibility means, first of all, that you fit your position and the real world. Second, it means that you have the power. The power is to coerce people to do things, okay? And you can do it with IP. When things change, you have to be able to force other people to change in the way that's good for you. And you have to be able to move fast enough. And I've already said that IP is more flexible, but IP awareness doesn't change so quickly. So you have to start it early. In conclusion, how flexible your company is and how flexible your IP strategy are go together. Showed you all sorts of IP positions and what they look like. And I particularly singled out non-goal positioning, not only because I like it, and I do, but also because that's the one that people not only ignore, but actually go against. I'm not going to budget a patent that doesn't cover what we're doing. I've heard that more than once in the last month. And the IP position diagrams need some work. So if anybody has any suggestions, please provide. And here I'm giving you just an example scenario. You have some smart guys and they want to do automated home dental care. Guess what? It's from the electrical engineering department. Okay, they come to you, you want to build an IP position for them. What are you going to do? Okay, so that's the kind of questions we want to answer using what I talked about today. I'm going to stop the recording now.